Hey guys, welcome to the new video. Today we're going to be going over the Bambu Studios slicer. Going to give you guys like basic tutorial that will help you understand some of the key features and settings without going into in-depth detail of some of the things I had questions when I first started. If you guys do enjoy this content, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment on something that I may have cleared up for you that you weren't understanding prior to the video. And let's get into it. This first area is going to be your printer tab. If you'll hit the cogwheel, this is where you're going to select all of your printers that you may have along with the nozzle sizes within those printers. For me, I have the Bambu Lab P1S along with a 0.2, 0.4, and 0.6 millimeter nozzle. You need to select all of these by checking them and then hit confirm. This first drop down menu is where you're going to select the printer you want to use along with the nozzle size. I'm currently using the Bambu Labs P1S with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, so I'm going to select that. This next drop down menu is where you're going to select your plate type. Make sure before you decide printing that you do have the correct plate selected here. The standard plate that comes with all of the Bambu Labs printers are the textured PEI plate, and unless you've been printing for a little bit, you may not have another type of plate. So just make sure you have the correct plate selected. Because if you have the wrong plate selected, they do have different temperatures that they have to get up to before they start printing. Like the cool plate, it can go all the way down to 35°, where the textured PEI plate is starting out at 55°. So you definitely need to make sure it's selected before you start printing so it will get to the correct bed temperature. This next section here is going to be for the filament. The first thing you see here is the flushing volumes. This is going to be for your AMS users, but basically what this does is Bambu Labs formulates the amount of purge needed to go in between colors so there will be no color bleed. They definitely purge way more than what is needed, causing extra waste, but I will give you guys a way to figure out how you can minimize that waste later in the video. The plus and minus is going to allow you to add or delete filament that you may or may not be using. This is mainly for people using the AMS, but if you do not have an AMS, then you will only be able to have one color selected. The next icon we have here is to sync filament list from the AMS. Basically, so you click this, and if you hit resync, it's going to synchronize your filament here to what you have set on your AMS, which over here, as you can see, I don't have the same colors that are in the filament section here. So as soon as I press this and press resync, it changes the filament colors, and if you have a different brand of filament to what I have currently set on my AMS. If you hit the cogwheel that's next to the sync icon, this brings up all of the filament profiles that you can use. In the system filaments tab, this is going to show you all of the stock profiles that the system has that you can use. But as you can tell down here, I have deselected a lot of these because what all this does is clutter up the drop down menu over here. This list is astronomically long if you don't deselect a lot of these. And the ones I've deselected are either the brands that I'm not using or the types of plastic that I'm not going to be using. So as you can see, I'm really just using a lot of PLA, PETG, and I have hopes of using TPU at some point, but currently right now I'm not, but I want to keep that there so I can select it just in case. So next to the system filaments, you've got the custom filaments. This is where you can create your own profile based on the types of brands you have that aren't within the system filaments section. And as you can see, Elegoo is not a part of the system filament, so I've created plenty of profiles there. FlashForge, Mica 3D, and then some STL Flicks and Sunlu. And the way I have created these profiles is over here, you have the generic, let me find it here, the generic profiles for certain types of filament. And what you do, you end up selecting the generic filament, do like a little test benchy or something like that, see how it prints, and if it prints well, you can use that profile to create a filament with the brand name and the type of filament you're using. And I'll give you an example on how to create that profile. So if you hit create new, what you do is go to the vendor tab and select the vendor that you're trying to create the new profile for. If for whatever reason you can't find the vendor within that, you can select can't find vendor I want and then type in the name of the vendor you're using. But for the time being, we're just going to go with Elegoo. And then the next drop down is where you select the type of filament you're wanting to use. For this example, we're just going to do PLA. And within the serial, this is where you're going to type in if it's like a basic, matte finish, silk, marble, carbon fiber, anything like that. So we're going to type basic here. And then what you want to do, you want to go down to the add filament preset under this filament. What you're going to have to do is go to copy current filament preset, select whichever printer, nozzle, anything you want this specific type of filament brand to go to. So currently I'm just going to go with just my 0.4 nozzle from my P1S. You'll select a filament preset, and since this is a new brand that we're trying to, fine tune and stuff like that, we're just going to give it the generic PLA preset with all of the temperatures that it needs to print out and stuff like that, and then we'll hit create. Then if my computer wants to load, there we go. Then it'll come up with this box saying filament created, but please go to the settings to edit your presets. Please note that the nozzle temperature, hotbed, and maximum volumetric speed each have a significant impact on print quality. Please set them carefully. So this is what I was talking about, the fine tuning. So now we can go into our Elegoo PLA. Why did it not show up? Oh, there it is, the PLA basic. We'll go in here, and then you want to edit your preset based on whichever printer you decided to add it to. We'll go in here, and you'll do all of your stuff like you're making your benchy and stuff like that. And based on how that comes out, you can go in here and edit all of the temperatures that it prints at and the bed temperature that you want it to print on so it can adhere better. And usually, I know with PLA, your 55 bed temperature is fine. Now, whenever you do like a silk, they are harder to get to adhere to the bed, so you want to have a higher temperature based on that. Sometimes even the nozzle temperature, you might want to bump that up. I know the silks that I've ran, I've bumped this setting up to 230 for the initial layer. And then same with the bed, I'll bump it up either to 60 or 65 to make sure I do get that bed adhesion. And then for the other layers, after that first initial layer, you can drop it back down to the 220 where it was 230 for the initial, and same with the bed. If you still end up having some adhesion issues, it might be good to just go ahead and bump this up to 60 as well. But that would be after you start doing your tests and stuff like that. Then if you go over to your cooling, I don't ever use the auxiliary fan for PLA. Like there's no reason to have the auxiliary fan. It has a chance to make your prints come off of the print bed and stuff like that. So I always select this and just go to 0 and just keep that to where the auxiliary fan does not come on after said first layer, like it says up here. You can make it to where the auxiliary fan doesn't come on till layer 3, layer 4, whatever you want to do. But for PLA, I don't use the auxiliary fan. And then your settings override. I'm going to go into more detail on this whenever I explain how to minimize your purge waste. So for right now, I'm not going to mess with that. But after you got all your settings the way you want it to, all you'll need to do is go up and hit this save icon, and it's going to save it to the printer you have selected for this profile to be on. Okay, now we're going on to the process tab. This tab is where you can do all of your editing to your layer heights and stuff like that. I'll get into that in a second. But your global tab here, all of the settings that you change are going to reflect on all of the objects you have on your build plate. If you go to the object tab, you can select a single object and change a setting only to that object, while the other objects that are on your build plate, they'll still have the same settings as your global settings, but we'll come back to this tab in just a moment. Then if you go over and select your advanced tab, as you can see, there's a lot more things you can do to fine tune whatever you're trying to do. But for right now, I'm going to keep the advanced tab off unless there is something within these tabs here that I do use and that I would recommend you using, but you don't have to mess with that advanced tab to make your prints fine. So the drop down menu here allows you to select your overall layer height for your print. On the 0.4 nozzle, you have layer heights that range anywhere from 0.08 up to 2.8 in increments of 0.04. Your 0.08 is your smallest layer height, and this is mainly for fine detail, but it also gives you a longer print time. But it's ideal for small objects like miniatures and stuff like that. Whereas if you go up to the 0.28, it's all for speed, but lower quality. So if you plan to sand down anything or you don't really care how it looks, this is what you would do, because you're going to have such a high layer height that you're going to see the layer lines very easily. So I've used this to make like some practical parts. I made a handle for my dryer that I didn't really care how it looked. I just wanted to print it fast. So I decided just to use the 0.28 layer height to get that done quickly. Okay, so now we're down here on the quality, strength, support, and others tabs. Here we're going to go over just the basics of what you need to know, and I'll switch between the advanced settings to go over anything that I use that isn't in just the basic side. There are other videos that you can go into an in-depth explanation of the other settings of the advanced that I don't end up covering. I'm just here to keep everything as basic as it needs to be so you guys don't get overwhelmed with all the other stuff that you can manipulate, like I did whenever I found those videos and I was like, this is blowing my mind, there's so much going on. All right, now we're on layer height. This is how tall your layer will print at. This will be based on your millimeters that you decide to select with this drop down menu. So if you change it to 0.24, it'll bump it up to 0.24, go to 0.08, then it'll change that as well. We're just going to stick with the 0.2 right now. And as you saw, between selecting different layer heights, your initial layer height stays the same. I don't ever mess with that based on the layer height up here to make it like 0.24 whenever I change this to 0.24. I just leave it at its stock setting. Then you drop down to the seam. This is also something that I don't really mess with. I just usually keep it on a line. There's only been one instance where I wish I would have put it to back, but other than that, the aligned is where I keep the seam at all times. And as far as the advance here, I don't ever mess with this. Then if we go over here and select the advanced tab, the only thing that I really ever use here is potentially the ironing. And I'm just going to read what it says here. Ironing is used small flow to print on the same height of surface, again to make the flat surface more smooth. So all it's doing is basically getting rid of any lines that will be on the top surface. Now we're on to the strength tab. So for the walls, each layer has a wall that is printed on every layer. The standard is 2, but if you need to make your object have more strength, you can bump this up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. The more walls you have is basically how much more durable your print will be. The only time I've ever manipulated these settings, it's basically been just for the bottom shell layers. I have printed a few coasters that I wanted the texture that the bed plate has to be essentially the top of my coaster. And the way I do that is I print the coaster face down. So whatever the picture I have on it or whatever I want to be seen, I'm giving it that texture. So there's been times that the the color that I'm using for the picture, say it's white, but the rest of the coaster is black, the infill is actually showing through on under the white. So I've changed the bottom shell layers up to like 5 so I don't get that color showing through through the white. Now down to the sparse infill. This is used so you don't have the object solid throughout the full print. It's a waste of filament and time. I've never found a situation where I really need any more than 15%. I'll usually float anywhere from 15 down to 10%. The only time I really lower it is if I up my wall loops to, 4 or 5 plus, because you're getting all of your strength in your walls where you don't need as much infill. The infill pattern is always defaulted to grid. I definitely do not ever recommend you doing this, because if you get into some wider objects, you've got a grid for the infill, and whenever it's going through its layers within the infill, there's a chance that the nozzle head can start going over the layers that are higher than where it's trying to print to get up to that next layer, and it can mess up your nozzle head. It can knock it out of whack, and you definitely don't want that to happen, because it's going to make your print print horribly. So I recommend using the gyroid. This is what I use on all of my prints, so I definitely never recommend doing the grid infill. It's just it's not good, and I don't understand why they have it as the default. Now if we toggle the advanced in the strength tab, there's nothing really here that I ever mess with, so I'm not going to go into detail on any of this portion. Okay, now we're into the support tab. I'm not going to go in too much detail with support. Basically, whenever you print something, just enable the support, and if it auto generates, leave it with that. If it doesn't create any support, then your model doesn't need any support. Now onto the others tab. As far as your bed adhesion, I've never ended up using a skirt. The only thing in this I've used is a brim, and the only time I use brims is either on a very tall object that once it gets up so tall it starts to wobble, and that brim will help secure it to the plate, or if I'm printing a wide object and I don't want it to start lifting off from the bed, I'll use that brim also to keep it secure to the plate. Your prime tower and flush options are only used whenever you're doing multicolor prints, so that would be with an AMS, and I just leave it how it is standard. So you've got it enabled, and then flush into the object support. The object support is your prime tower. For this next section here in the special modes, I'm going to have a couple of models here on the build plate. Your print sequence is basically either it prints by the layer or by the object. By layer, if you slice it, it's just going to print by layer once it's done here. It's just going to print each object by each layer. And as you can see, the support's enabled, so it's saying that it needs support here, and we're just going to let it do its thing here. But if we go back to prepare and go to object, you see this area that this area is showing the print head of where it's going around to print the object. If you're going to print by object, you got to make sure that there's enough area between each one, so whenever it's done printing this object, it's able to go over here, start at the very bottom, and as it's building up, it doesn't have any way of hitting the object that's already printed, because it's going to mess up the other print. So now if we hit slice, it's going to generate the G code, and then you'll see, let me do that and that, you're going to see how it prints by object rather than both objects by each layer. So it prints that one, and then it'll print this one next. Now if you go over into the objects tab, you're going to be able to see which object is what, and based on who's up top, that'll be the one that prints first. So normally the way I do this is I want the object that's further from where the print head homes for like the purge area. I want the front one to be printed first. So you need to actually move that up top. So that'll be the first one to print, and then the back one will print next. So now if we hit slice, you'll see that once we get all the way to the bottom, the front one starts printing first, and then once that's done, it goes to the back one. So for the spiral vase, I've never used this option, so I'm not going to go into detail with that because I don't have any knowledge of it. Now for the time lapse, this is the video it takes whenever you print an object. You can either go with traditional or smooth. Traditional, whenever it creates the time lapse, you'll see the print head moving around the object, whereas if you move it to smooth, this creates a seamless time lapse to where after each layer the print head goes back to the purge area, then it takes its picture, and then it does its next layer, goes back to the print or the purge area, takes another picture, blah blah blah. So it makes a smooth time lapse to where you don't see that print head moving at all, and it looks like it's just building out of nowhere. And it's really cool, but it takes a lot more time to do it. And it also creates a purge tower because it does take a little bit of time to create that picture, so it's got to prime the nozzle again before it starts printing. So that's why it takes even longer to print. I never used the smooth option, but it does look really cool whenever you do create the time lapse. Now this fuzzy skin option, I've actually never used this, so what I'm going to do is just pull up the wiki to show you what it looks like. Essentially all it's doing is making it to where your layer lines aren't really shown. And as far as like how it creates this, I'm not fully certain. I've never really used it. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can find another YouTube video that actually explains exactly how it works. Now the time has come to show you guys how to minimize your purged waste. This is the model that I've been using to eliminate as much purge as I have to. This is by, I'm not going to butcher his name, so this is the guy that created it. But basically what you're doing is you're printing your first color, and it goes through its print, and then once it's ready to switch to the red, which is actually where it is blue down here, it'll switch to the red. It'll start printing without any purge, going line by line, and then you'll start seeing that the red is starting to come through. And once the red is fully red, none of this little purple area, this number here is what you want to apply to your flush volumes. And I will show you what I'm talking about. Actually, before I show you where you need to apply the flushing volumes, because all of this is zeroed out for the parameters to be able to do this print, do not change anything that he has put the parameters in for. Just do not mess with this. Just get the two colors you want and select them by going here, and where you see you've got gray and orange and then orange and gray, this is how you have to set it up to where it'll do the print correctly. Okay, so I've pulled up a model that has a lot of color changing throughout a print. So as you can see right now, it is 5 colors. Don't worry about that. I'm just going to show you what you need to do as far as implementing the purge volume. I'm going to show you how to do all this. But as you can see, whenever you're switching from red and it goes to yellow, it takes 639 cubic millimeters. Don't ask me how it actually works within the purging. I just know that whenever you change this, it does change a lot. So what I'm going to do, I've already created a lot of purging templates, and I'm going to add these in to where they're necessary, and I'm going to show you the difference between the print time and the amount of purge waste that we reduce. But if we go to slice, this is probably going to take a minute because there is a lot going on here. I'll cut back once it's done. Okay, so as you can see in this print, there is 390 filament changes, with a total amount of red being used is 61 grams, 97 in yellow, 46 in green, 45 in gray, and then 43 in white. Now this is your total of filament used between the purging and all of that stuff. So once I go back in and redo the flush volumes, you're going to be able to see the difference in how much it takes. So this is one print is going to take 19 hours to print. Now once I get the purge volumes redone, we'll see how much it actually reduces. We've got nearly 300 grams of filament used whenever the model is actually only nearly 71 grams. All right, now that we have the new purge volumes entered, let's see how much the grams and time is reduced. We're gonna reslice, and I will cut back once it is done. Actually, it's not taking too long, never mind. Okay, now that we've implemented that, we now have, where it was almost 300 grams, we have reduced it down to 161 grams. And the time has went down from 19 hours to 15 hours and 33 minutes. This is an extremely amount of time saving and filament saving that you can use whenever you create your multicolor prints. Now make sure you do your due diligence and create your own flushing volumes. Don't take what I put into this model because it could vary between the filament that you use. I know this was a long video and I covered a lot, but I hope that this helped you guys with anything you didn't understand previously. So if it did, please leave a comment on what helped you out after watching this video. Thank you guys so much, and we'll catch you in the next one.